This is Behind the Lens, and my name is Tom Blank. This Behind the Lens is an ongoing conversation about all things film happening in Eugene, Oregon. Tonight, my guests are Mike Duffield and Mark Stafford. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Mike,
Yeah.
how did you become a film editor?
Well, I started out years ago out of high school doing small projects in Super 8, which a lot of people know about in film, and decided that that would be a fun thing to do. I had no other things in mind, so I went into, got a television degree here at Lane Community College, a 2-year degree, and then went to Montana State University, got a Bachelor of Science in film production, and then I had no idea what I was going to do.
Yeah. Now you have an accreditation and no place to go.
That's right, that's right. And at the time, this was back in 1979, at the time, basically, somebody like me would have gone to New York or LA. They were the two places where jobs were available. I decided to go to New York. Once I got to New York, I started out like everyone does, as a messenger, running packages around the city, and eventually got into the point where I was working for a small production company, post-production company. Enjoyed that, and assisted on a low-budget feature, very low-budget feature, film, all film-based, no video, which was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Learned a lot from it, and then eventually became an editor myself, working mostly in advertising, commercials, and finishing, high-end finishing, and then did that for a long time, 23 years roughly.
Well, the first credit that you got as an editor, do you remember what it was for, what the project was?
Well, the first real credit that I got was as an assistant editor on one of the John Lennon's videos. Nobody told me there'd be days like these, shortly after he was killed. Mm-hmm. And it was a music video, of course, but it was a lot of fun to work on. Just something that came up. Production company happened to like our post-production.
Yeah.
So.
We're here with Mark Stafford, who is a professional videographer here in Eugene. Mark, have you got any questions for Mike that you'd like to put to him?
Things were a lot different back then. You learned to edit not with a computer,
right?
Yeah,
right.
But with film.
Yeah,
more than likely.
For a very short time, actually. 1979 was really one of the transition time frame. I didn't do any professional work in film. I actually started working in video, but very low level. We had computers controlled machines, of course, and everything ran through a switcher, where all of your video choices were just laid out on a board, basically, and you made selections. But between 79 and roughly 90, it was all done that way for the most part. And then things changed drastically with nonlinear editing.
So once you got your profession in line and you were an editor, what was the thing that you learned about making a good cut?
Well, the process of editing itself is all about telling your story. If you were to take 10 editors, put them into a room, and give them the same footage, each of those editors would come up with a different story. You could even hand them a script that was the same for each of those, and each of them would have a different perspective, a different way of showing the right story for their purposes. And to me, what that says is there probably is no one right cut. There is a cut or an edit or a sequence that works. And whatever it is that works, oftentimes tells the story best or clearest, or perhaps tells the story in the way that the director or producer really wants it to be told.
Right. We talked before a little bit about the tendency toward perfectionism in editors, and that one of the things that we determined was that there is no such thing as perfect in the editing process. Would you expound on that?
Absolutely. Even very simple things. You know, the question that when you're cutting a scene together always comes up. Do I have to start with a wide shot? Then do I have to go to a medium shot? Do I have to go to a close-up? And the real answer to that is, it depends. It depends on what your story is. If your story is about someone reacting to a sound or an event, no, you need to cut to maybe a reaction. You need to get there first because that's important. There is no rule other than to say, you know, you have to convey an emotion of some sort. You have to convey a story from beginning to end. And if you can do that in a sequence with the material you've got, then you're in very good shape.
Yeah, the phrase that I like to use in terms of making these choices for what are the story beats is that your job is the selection of significant detail.
It's true. That's
and then
true.
you have to take those details and put them in a sequence, an order, so that they become comprehensible to the viewer.
Right. And sometimes in that process, it's not always the visual image that is precedent. Maybe sometimes what you want is a sound is more important, or maybe it's the words that are more important. Oftentimes people have the idea that I have to cut the pictures together in a certain way, and then whatever happens in the sound happens. But you can allow each of those to play a stronger role depending on the needs of the story or the needs of the sequence.
You could probably think of some examples in feature films where the sound was heard before you went to the visual cut. It's in like Dr. Zhivago, the sound of the train, which seems
Yes.
like a scream, and then you see it's a train.
Right. That's a good example. You know, we just saw a film, Sorcerer, the other day, and I remember very distinctly listening to a bit of music that was very strong coming out of a scene, and then when we cut to a young lady walking along a street, that sound is still in the scene. It's still trailing out. It's tying that one thing to another thing, different time, different places.
I've heard that described as an L cut.
Yes, it's an L cut. Any time that you lead with a picture and the sound doesn't follow, or the sound is first and the picture follows, and there can be any kind of gap in there, it's called an L cut.
Yeah, from the letter L indicating something
Right.
to follow.
Something starts here and then
Moves over.
Oftentimes when we're out shooting something with like a split page script, for example, we'll have a itemized list of the shots, our shot list, that we have next to our script. But when we're out there shooting, we're thinking of post-production also. And so we'll shoot that shot, but we'll also think, well, how can we make this better in post-production for the editor? And so we'll combine, you know, other shots. We'll do a wide shot, medium, or perhaps even a close-up.
For the benefit of our audience, would you describe what the term post-production includes?
Post-production is what happens after everything is shot. And literally that can be everything. That would include getting your sound and putting it all together in one location. Nowadays it's on a computer. That can be bringing in files now, video. That can be doing all of your special effects. And finally, you know, there's color correction that's involved, because when you're shooting things, especially for a feature, you don't shoot it at the right density that you want to finish with. What you shoot is you shoot something actually a little brighter and more open, so you have values in the image that you can adjust. And then the process of finishing, of color correcting, then takes you into that process of matching scene to scene to scene to scene.
Yeah, I'd like to just draw a line under the term color correction.
Yeah.
And give us an example, if you can come up with one, of how sequences in film may be given different meanings based on different color values.
Well, there's some general rules that I think as human beings we understand. In most scenes, in most situations, bright, open, sunlight happy. Okay, that's the term that would come up. In other situations, you get into a darkness or or lots of shadow, or lots of just a lack of light in general, there's a sinister element to it. There's the horror films, of course, are replete with that sort of thing. Tension is created by showing something, but not necessarily everything. So the darker the scene, the more tension. There's a general rule also that some people have expounded on, and that is that certain colors mean certain things at different times. And I read in one book talking about color palettes that if you see the color purple in a scene, that tells you that there's probably going to be a murder. Which it's a psychological thing. They've discovered, just through studies, that's generally a true thing, not necessarily always.
Not necessarily always, because not all the directors and film writers have read that book.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So when we're shooting video, Mike, we're setting our exposure to an IRE value.
Mm-hmm.
If we go over too much,
right,
for me, it's far more difficult to correct that.
Yeah.
Mark, can you explain RE?
Yeah, so it's the International Radio Engineers Association. It's kind of like SMPTE or something,
Yeah.
Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers. So it's a standard for video, and we try not to exceed 100%
right.
on that. If we do, then things start to blow up and go crazy.
Yeah, the general thinking on that is that a camera can capture a broader spectrum of light than most broadcast images can handle. And that's good, because you want the most information you can get from the camera. And so what happens is, if you shoot and clip the video,
yes,
you get it too bright, so that it has a flat white element to it, what happens then is that creates noise, in effect. And as an editor, first of all, it's hard to correct, because now if I take that white and drop it down a little bit, I get gray instead of getting an image. In film, it's a whole different animal. In film, you can shoot, and then if you step that down, you actually can see an image out of that. So in video, it's a little bit different. You don't want to do that if you can avoid that.
The contrast ratios are far different in film than they are in video.
Explain contrast
ratios.
So
the difference between black and like a gray, there are steps in video,
right.
where in film you might have, I don't know what the ratio is, I can't remember anymore, but it might be 50 to 1 or something, and in video it might be 20 to 1.
Right. And yet we can talk about this characteristic
mm-hmm.
and remind ourselves that this is the one thing that old-time feature directors hold on to,
right.
and wanting to stay making their movies in film, because blacks are blacker,
yep. mm-hmm.
whites are whiter.
Yep.
That the emotional values of these colors are dissipated when they go onto a broadcast medium.
Yes, yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I guess I would talk about that only in the sense that projecting something is different than putting it onto a screen. Putting light through a piece of film is a different control mechanism than lighting up an LCD or an LED image. And because of that, they have there are shortfalls to both of those things. A well-shot HD image can be very nice and very pretty and very well received, and it can look very good. A poorly shot HD image, there's not much you can do about it, because you don't have the latitude that you do in a film. And so I can understand why some people still enjoy the look of film much better than they do the look of video.
And audiences, many of them, value the experience of going to the theater and seeing an image 40 feet wide with these color values as a deeper and more moving experience than watching that on their screen at home or on their tablet.
Sure, sure, and that's an interesting thing, because as an editor, you always want to cut with an awareness of how your sequence, how your film, how your project is going to be viewed. If I know that what I'm shooting is going to, or what I'm cutting is going to be on YouTube, it's a whole different animal than if it's going to be on a DVD, on a TV, which is usually larger, or if it's going to be projected. All of those things affect your choices. As a viewer, you see the detail on a big screen that you will not ever see in any way on a computer screen.
There's so many more things to find on a big screen that you will miss if you watch it on television.
It's the details again, which you talked about earlier. You will miss those details if they're on a small TV screen.
Mike, you mentioned back in the 90s that everything changed because of computer editing.
Yes.
And I certainly have gone through a couple of editing systems. But it was an amazing time, amazing feeling that we had. It was almost like Christmas morning when we got our first nonlinear editing system. And we were able to actually do a dissolve or put a title on something. And that precious time is gone now because almost everybody has software to do these kinds of things, and it's a lot less expensive than what we initially paid for.
Oh, absolutely.
But tell me about that process when you first started doing nonlinear editing.
Well, let's go back a little bit farther, just for a second. Just perspective. When I started in the business, an editing room that I worked in, once you got the equipment in the room and all the machines, it was about $1 million. Okay, the facility I worked at, we had 3 of those, just in the one facility. Nowadays, I just bought 4 years ago a computer for nonlinear editing in my home, and we spent about $12,000. There's a massive difference there. The other thing that happened was when the transition came, suddenly you were able to make multiple versions of the same thing. You could cut a scene, you could cut a commercial, you could cut a sequence, and if you didn't like it, you could save it and make it another version of it, and make another version of it. And pretty soon, if you kept doing that, you could end up with so many versions of scenes and sequences that you couldn't tell the difference. And that meant your decision-making process had broken down.
I would think so.
Very, very happened a lot in the advertising business because there was an influx of now we can do anything. And the problem became, well, now you can do anything, but you don't have forever to do it. So, so you have to make adjustments. When editors started being able to put in titles quickly, when editors started being able to do dissolves in a nonlinear fashion or do even some rudimentary effects, it changed how the finishing process worked.
Back up a little and give us the experience of making a dissolve in old film.
Okay. In film, when you took your film and you decided you were going to put a dissolve in, you made a physical splice, taped it together, and you took a yellow grease pencil and started the dissolve, which is actually a line on one frame, and you drew a line all the way across the film till you got to the other end of the dissolve. A 24-frame dissolve, then you covered 24 frames of picture. And then what happened was that was great. You could see that, and you could see a line now when you projected that and played it. What you wanted to do was you wanted to actually see the dissolve. Well, you wouldn't see the dissolve till you sent it off for an optical.
Yeah, you send it to an optical house.
That's right. And at an optical house, they would go through and they would run that piece of film in particular through and close the lens as it run through the first pass. In the second pass, they'd open the lens. And so once that film was processed, then you'd end up with a dissolve.
So it was a thing that happened that was quite costly to work because you had to send it out and have it done.
Oh, sure.
Sure. And if you wanted to change the frame rate, you'd have to do it all over again.
And you would pay for it again.
Yeah. And now, if you have an Avid or some nonlinear system, you do it with a couple of moves of your controls.
Yep. Very simple, very straightforward. And you can see it right away. You don't have to wait overnight for the lab to run it through.
for me, doing our work, we would go up to one of the TV stations here to do our online post-production. So if we were doing, we could do titles, we could do dissolves, we could do some effects up there, but it was about $80 to $100 an hour to do that. And we would have to have an A tape and a B tape. They had two machines.
Yeah.
They would run it through an elaborate switching process, and they could preview it and show us what it was going to look like and then actually take the edit. We had the capability of doing cuts only, and so we were pretty limited at that point. We would have to go to do the online post-production at a TV station to finish something with a little bit higher production values.
And now we're in a new world.
We are.
We are. And here I am standing in the grocery store, and I have a student in front of me talking about how they have the latest upgrade on this editing software. And I'm going, yeah, everybody has this, and everybody has the capability of doing something now. So it's a fascinating transition over the last 20 years.
I'd like to hear what you both think about the value of your experience and your time in your positions, as opposed to somebody who has just bought a computer and has loaded it with the device. What is your feeling about these young whippersnappers stepping up to try to do the effects that has taken you decades to learn to do well?
Right. Well, my impression of that, first of all, is that the more experience you have, the sooner you can make decisions in this editing process, at least that way. The more time you spend actually doing the work, going through and making mistakes and learning from them, the more time you can spend gaining the decision-making ability quickly, the better off you are. When I come to a scene, I know I can look at the footage right away and I can tell this is going to work or it's not going to work. But I can only do that because I've looked at footage for years and years and years. Young people are going to have to learn how to look at the footage, and it's going to take time. And you can do cuts. It's easy to do cuts, dissolves, and effects nowadays, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to look the way somebody with 20, 30 years of experience would make it look.
So we take in interns all the time from Lane Community College and occasionally from the U of O, and I just had one in from the A3 school in Springfield. And usually what I do is I will have them do some simple tasks. I will let them discover the software if they haven't already learned how to use it. And then I will give them a little bit more complicated task, and I'll let them struggle for a while. If they get it finished, that's great. And then I'll go back and show them, oh, by the way, here's a shortcut that you might be helpful to you. And they look at me and they're going, well, why didn't you show me this before? And I go, well, because you need to actually spend time learning how this whole system works. And so I think that's really important. We are seeing more and more students that come out and are really just on their toes.
Yes.
And doing some great work. I have had, I've hired, I don't know, a couple of dozen folks, I suppose, over the years from the LCC program. And the last young guy I had was, I was ready to let him go. He just wasn't working out very good. And but I gave him a little bit more opportunity, and now he's working as a marketing executive up in Corvallis for a huge egg company up there. He's doing fantastic.
Well, bless his heart.
Yeah. And so you do have to, I think you do have to spend time. You do have to learn your craft.
And make your mistakes.
You have to make mistakes, and they're hard to learn sometimes.
And the technical expertise that you can now purchase somehow has to be tempered with the craft of the grizzled veteran. I've told you that my son is a visual effects supervisor, and he and I have talked about that now that anything can be shown on film, anything is possible. When anything is impossible, anything is possible, nothing seems to matter.
Hmm.
It doesn't make any difference to the audience because they expect anything.
That's, yeah, okay, okay.
It's like the thrill of seeing the camel caravan coming in with the groceries is
Right.
when it's visual effects induced, doesn't have the same weight.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think that's part of the language of video, the film, changing.
Yeah.
You know, I think that as the language adjusts because of the ability for so many people to have effects like that, I think we're seeing a little change in the language and the acceptable way it's used.
And let's suppose that there are more changes coming down the pike.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And these people who are young now and have their brand new computers are going to be surprised in the same way that we're surprised
Right.
when the next evolution occurs.
Being able to adapt is one of the great assets of any, I think, editor, and also working as a videographer.
Yeah.
And we were talking about an interview I did with Randall Clark, who was the head supervisor for WIDA doing the animation on Lord of the Rings. And but what I did tell you was that we flew down to San Francisco to do the interview. We took a teleprompter with us, and what we wanted him to do was to look directly into the teleprompter where the camera was behind, as opposed to looking off camera. And we hooked up another camera that went through the teleprompter that the person asking the questions to him so he could respond directly into the camera. We got down there and we opened up the teleprompter, and sure enough, every time I fly, they break something. And here is the mirror, the two-way mirror, which is like a $500 or $600 mirror.
Gone.
Broken up in pieces. So I go to the producer and I tell him, we've got a problem. We no longer have a teleprompter that's functioning. And his response to me was,
We'll fix it in post.
no, that's not acceptable.
Okay.
And I'm going, what am I going to do? So what we ended up doing was we took some clear tape, packaging tape, we taped the mirror back together again, we put it back in the prompter, we got it working, and we did the interview.
Okay. Well, we're at the end of our time for this particular episode, and I want to thank both Mark Stafford and Mike Duffield for being with us, and we'll have you back again, and you can switch chairs.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Very much.